The applause washed over me like a warm, comforting wave. I stood on the small, makeshift stage in the center of the university library's main reading room, a bouquet of 24 yellow roses in my arms, my heart so full. It felt like it might burst. For 40 years, this library had been my life's work, my sanctuary. I had gone from a young, bright-eyed librarian to the head of archives, the keeper of our town's collective memory. The speeches from my colleagues, my friends, had been full of such warmth, such genuine affection, that it brought tears to my eyes. This was my retirement party, the closing of one beautiful chapter and the beginning of another. My son, my only child, Mark, stepped up to the microphone for what he called a final toast. He looked so handsome in his expensive suit, so confident. He took the microphone from me, giving my hand a little squeeze, a gesture that, to the 100 people in this room, looked like one of filial love. But I felt the impatience in his grip. I felt the cool, dismissive pat. I knew this was not a toast to me. It was a toast to what my retirement represented to him, an opportunity. "Let's all raise a glass to my mother, Eleanor," he began, his voice booming with a false, practiced warmth that no one else seemed to notice. "To her 40 years of dedicated service, to a lifetime of hard work, which has more than earned her a long, peaceful, and well-deserved rest." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, a showman working his audience. "And I, for one, am so thrilled to announce that she will be getting that rest at the beautiful Golden Meadows Nursing Home, where she'll be moving next month." A stunned, confused silence fell over the room. The air crackled with it. My colleagues looked at each other, their congratulatory smiles frozen on their faces, turning into masks of bewildered pity. They were looking at me, expecting me to be just as surprised as they were. Mark, oblivious, continued, his voice full of a triumphant, greedy joy. "This is a new chapter for all of us. Her moving to a place with round-the-clock care will give us all peace of mind, and it will finally allow us to sell her large, empty house and realize its full potential for the next generation. To Mom, and to the future." He raised his glass to me, his eyes shining, expecting me to smile my tearful, grateful, motherly smile. He was so sure of his victory, so sure that his quiet, bookish, gentle old mother would simply acquiesce, that she would accept this public declaration of her own obsolescence with a quiet, dignified sadness. He did not see the crisp, legal-sized envelope in my handbag, the one resting against my reading glasses, the one with his name on it, the one that was not a thank you note, but an eviction notice. Because my son, in his breathtaking arrogance, in his ravenous haste to claim his inheritance, had forgotten one small, crucial detail. For the past 3 years, he and his family had been living, rent-free, in me house. "Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Eleanor. I'm 67 years old." And on the night the world gathered to celebrate my long and respected career, my son announced my impending institutionalization so he could finally get his hands on my property. The secret I am sharing with you today is not that my son is greedy. That, I am afraid, has been an open secret for many years. No, the secret is that I knew this was coming. This ambush, this public pronouncement of my future, was not a surprise to me. For the past year, I have been a quiet spy in my own home. I have listened to the whispered conversations they thought I couldn't hear. I have seen the real estate brochures, accidentally, left on the kitchen counter. I have felt the subtle, creeping shift in their behavior, from loving family members to impatient, expectant heirs. They thought I was a frail, slightly deaf, and financially naive old woman, lost in her books, oblivious to the world around her. They thought I was a problem to be managed. They had no idea that while they were plotting my future, I was busy securing my own. They had no idea that I had already met with my lawyers, that I had already restructured my entire estate, that I had already created the very foundation they would be hearing about for the first time tonight. They thought they were staging a coup. They had no idea they were walking into a counterinsurgency that I had been planning for months. So please, get comfortable. This is not a story about a poor, helpless victim. This is the story of a librarian who decided to use her skills, research, patience, and a deep, abiding respect for the facts, to teach her own entitled son a final, unforgettable lesson in consequences. Your support, your likes and subscriptions, Tossilent Grandma, are a quiet cheer for a woman who decided she would not go gently into that good night. To understand the cold, calculated cruelty in my son's eyes as he stood on that stage, you have to understand the prince I raised, and the kingdom of entitlement his father and I so foolishly built for him. You have to understand that the seeds of this terrible Thanksgiving were not planted recently. They were sown over 40 years of my own misguided, unconditional love. My husband, Richard, was a good man, a brilliant man. He was a partner at one of the city's top architectural firms, a man who designed beautiful, soaring buildings that became landmarks. We were not fabulously wealthy, but we were very, very comfortable. We had a beautiful life, a life of quiet success, of travel, of art, of intellectual curiosity. Our home, the one my son now saw as nothing more than a valuable piece of real estate, was our masterpiece. Richard had designed it, and I had turned it into a home, a warm, welcoming sanctuary filled with books, music, and the smell of my baking. We were a team, and at the center of that team, the sun around which our entire universe orbited, was our son, Mark. We gave him everything, not just material things, though he wanted for nothing. We gave him the best schools, the European summer trips, the brand new car for his 16th birthday. But more than that, we gave him a life without consequences. We gave him a safety net so strong, so absolute, that he never learned the terrifying, vital fear of falling. His first business venture, a trendy, upscale coffee shop he started right out of college, failed within a year. He had the vision, but not the discipline, not the work ethic. He was more interested in being the cool, young entrepreneur than in the grueling, day-to-day reality of running a small business. When the debts piled up, Richard and I quietly paid them off. We told him it was a learning experience. His second venture, a high-end graphic design firm, was a similar story. He was a brilliant designer, but a terrible businessman. He overspent, underdelivered, and alienated his clients with his arrogance. When it imploded, leaving him with another mountain of debt, we bailed him out again. We refinanced our own home to do it. We saw it as our duty, our role as parents, to protect him from the harsh realities of the world. We didn't realize we were not protecting him. We were crippling him. We were teaching him that his actions had no real-world consequences, that the bank of Mom and Dad was always open, its reserves infinite. Richard, in the last few years of his life, began to see the monster we had created. He saw the entitlement in our son, the casual expectation that his problems were our problems, his debts our responsibility. "We've made him soft, Eleanor," he would say to me late at night, his voice full of a quiet, weary sadness. "We've built him a beautiful gilded cage, and he's never learned how to fly on his own." After Richard passed away from cancer 4 years ago, I was lost. The grief was a physical weight, a constant, crushing presence. Mark and his wife, Susan, were there for me at first. They were attentive, kind, but their kindness came with a price I did not yet understand. A year after the funeral, Mark's latest venture, an ambitious real estate development project, fell through. This time, it was not just a failure, it was a catastrophe. He was on the brink of personal bankruptcy, died horror. They came to my house one evening, their faces pale with a desperate, practiced panic. "Mom," Mark began, his voice thick with a shame that I now recognize was pure performance. "We're in trouble, big trouble. We're going to lose everything. Our house, our savings, everything." Susan, a woman who could cry on command, began to weep, her sobs the perfect theatrical accompaniment to his speech. "We have nowhere to go," she cried, clutching my hand. "The bank is going to foreclose. We'll be out on the street, with the children." And then came the solution they had so carefully rehearsed. "Mom," Mark said, his eyes full of a false, desperate hope. Can we just move in with you? Just for a little while. Just until we can get back on our feet. This house is so big, and you're all alone here. We could help you. We could take care of you. We would be a family again." What could I do? My son was in trouble. My grandchildren were at risk. My own heart was aching with a loneliness so profound. It was a physical illness. The thought of having my family under my roof again, of filling the silent, empty rooms with the noise of my grandchildren's laughter, was a temptation I was too weak to resist. So I said yes. The takeover was not a sudden invasion. It was a slow, creeping, and insidious occupation. The first month, they were perfect guests. They were quiet, respectful, and endlessly grateful. Mark would bring me coffee in the morning. Susan would insist on cooking dinner every night. They would sit with me in the evenings, listening to my stories about their father, their faces masks of perfect, loving sympathy. They were building a narrative of a loving family taking care of their grieving, elderly mother. It was a beautiful story, and it was a complete and utter lie. The first crack in their perfect facade appeared, as it so often does, over something small and seemingly insignificant. My dining room table. It was a beautiful, solid mahogany table that Richard and I had bought on our honeymoon in England. It was a piece of furniture that held 50 years of memories, boisterous family dinners, quiet breakfasts, my children's homework spread out across its polished surface. It was the heart of my home. About 2 months after they moved in, I came downstairs one morning to find the dining room empty. The table was gone. In its place stood a sleek, modern, glass and steel monstrosity, a cold, sterile thing that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. I found Susan in the kitchen, humming to herself as she unloaded the dishwasher. "Susan, dear," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "The dining room table, where is it?" She turned to me, a bright, brittle smile on her face. "Oh, that old thing. I had it moved down to the basement storage. It was so dark and heavy, Eleanor, and honestly, a bit of a safety hazard. This new one is so much more practical, don't you think? And it fits so many more people. We can finally have proper dinner parties." That's the way. That old thing. Palma. She had dismissed 50 years of my life, 50 years of my marriage, as that old thing. I stood there, speechless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand that she bring my table back. But I looked at her smiling, confident face, and I saw the hard, unyielding glint in her eyes. I saw that this was not a discussion. It was a declaration. A declaration that my taste, my memories, my history were no longer relevant. And David, when he came home that evening, simply patted my arm and said, "It looks great, Susie. So much more light in the room." He didn't even notice the look on my face. He didn't notice that the heart of his childhood home had just been ripped out and replaced with a piece of cold, dead glass. That was the beginning. After the table, the floodgates opened. Their things began to appear, slowly at first, then all at once, a relentless tide of their life washing away mine. My living room, once a quiet space of books and art, became a playroom, littered with the plastic detritus of my grandchildren's toys. Richard's study, his sanctuary, the room where he had spent thousands of hours bent over his drafting table, became Mark's home office. The beautiful architectural models Richard had built were relegated to a dusty corner, replaced by stacks of threatening legal documents and unpaid bills. My home was no longer mine. I was a guest, a curator, in a museum dedicated to their lives, their tastes, their needs. The final, most brutal stage of the occupation began about a year ago. It was the beginning of the end. It was the slow, systematic erasure of me. They began to talk about me as if I weren't there. They would discuss my needs, my future, my health, in low, impatient whispers at the kitchen table, convinced that my hearing was not what it used to be. They were right about that. My hearing wasn't as sharp, but my mind was. I began to listen. I became a quiet, invisible spy in my own home. I heard them talking about my stubbornness in wanting to maintain the garden myself. "She's going to fall and break a hip," Susan would say to Mark, her voice a sharp, impatient hiss. "And then what? Then she'll really be our problem." I heard them complaining about the inconvenience of my doctor's appointments. I had to take a whole afternoon off work to take her to the cardiologist, Mark grumbled one evening. And for what? For him to tell her the same thing he always does: eat less salt. I heard them discussing the value of my house, their voices a low, greedy hum of speculation. I had a realtor friend do a quiet appraisal, Susan whispered one night, thinking I was asleep upstairs. Even in this market, we're looking at over $1 million. $1 million, Mark. That would solve all of our problems. The first time I saw a real estate brochure, it was on the kitchen counter, partially hidden under a pile of mail. It was for the Meadows Nursing Home. A beautiful, expensive, and soul-crushing place. I saw the glossy pictures of smiling, white-haired seniors playing shuffleboard, their faces masks of a serene, medicated contentment. I felt a chill run down my spine, a cold, visceral fear that I had not felt since the day Richard was diagnosed. When I asked Susan about it, my voice carefully casual, she gave me a brilliant, dismissive laugh. "Oh, that," she said, not even meeting my eye. "That's for my mother. We're just exploring options for her down the road. You know how it is." It was a plausible lie. And I, desperate to believe that my own child was not plotting my disposal, chose to believe it. But then, the signs became impossible to ignore. A conversation I overheard between Mark and his lawyer on the phone. A conversation about long-term care options and asset management. An email I saw on Susan's laptop when she had left it open on the kitchen table. An email from a realtor with the subject line, "Updated market appraisal for 124 Oakwood Lane." My address. The truth was a slow, dawning horror. They were not just living with me. They were waiting for me to die. And they were growing impatient. My continued presence in my own home, the home my husband had built for me, was an inconvenience, an obstacle to the bright, prosperous future they felt they were owed. I was no longer their mother. I was a squatter, living in the middle of their inheritance. The day I finally decided to act, the day the grieving, passive widow died and the quiet, cold warrior was born, was the day I found the notes for my own eulogy. They were on the printer in Mark's office, my husband's old study. He had been preparing for my upcoming retirement party. He had, with a breathtaking, cynical foresight, written a beautiful, moving speech about my life, my career, my legacy. And on the back of the last page, he had scribbled some notes for a conversation with his sister. Notes that read, "Retirement party. Good public chance to announce move. Golden Meadows, deposit paid. Realtor, on standby. Need to push her on PO next week. Emphasize her health safety." He was not just planning my future. He was planning my disposal. He had already paid a deposit to the place where he intended to store me until I died. I stood there, in the doorway of my husband's study, the piece of paper trembling in my hand, and I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The grief, the fear, the confusion, they all burned away, leaving behind only the hard, sharp, and unbreakable diamond of pure, righteous rage. The time for sorrow was over. The time for waiting was over. The time for being a victim was over. That afternoon, I made an appointment with my husband's estate lawyer, a man I had not seen since Richard's funeral. I walked into his office, a frail-looking, grieving widow. I walked out 2 hours later, a quiet, cold, and meticulously prepared warrior. The plan was set. The foundation was established in secret. The eviction notice was drafted and notarized. All I had to do was wait. Wait for them to walk into the beautiful, elegant, and inescapable trap I had just set for them. And my retirement party, the celebration they thought was the beginning of their victory, was the perfect stage for their final, public, and devastating defeat. The night of my retirement party was a masterfully orchestrated illusion. On the surface, it was a warm, loving tribute to a long and distinguished career. The university library had been transformed. Soft lighting glowed on the spines of 1,000,000 books, and the air smelled of old paper, catered canapes, and the faint, sweet perfume of my friends' good wishes. I played my part to perfection. I was the gracious, humble, and slightly overwhelmed guest of honor. I laughed at the old anecdotes my colleagues shared. I accepted their hugs and their well wishes with tears in my eyes. Real tears this time. Tears of genuine love and nostalgia for the life I was leaving behind. But beneath the surface of my serene, smiling facade, I was a general on the eve of a great battle. My heart was not a fluttering, sentimental thing. It was a cold, steady, and strategic drum, beating out the final, terrifying countdown. In my elegant but sensible handbag lay the weapons that would decide the fate of my future. A single, crisp, legal-sized envelope, and the speech I had spent a week memorizing. A speech that would either save me or destroy me completely. My children were there, of course, playing their own parts. They were the perfect, doting son and daughter-in-law. They hovered by my side, their faces masks of filial pride. Susan had even organized a slideshow of my life, a collection of photographs that flashed on a screen behind the podium. Me as a young girl, me as a bride on my wedding day with Richard, me holding a newborn Mark, me with my grandchildren. It was a beautiful, sentimental tribute, a perfect piece of public relations. But I saw it for what it was, a carefully curated narrative designed to cement their image as a loving, devoted family, just before they announced their plan to ship their beloved matriarch off to a nursing home. They were not celebrating my life, they were memorializing it. They were building my mausoleum, and they were expecting me to admire the architecture. The speeches from my colleagues were long and heartfelt. They spoke of my dedication, my quiet wisdom, my unwavering kindness. They spoke of the library as my second home, of me as its heart. With every warm, loving word, the knot of cold resolve in my stomach tightened. They were speaking of a woman my own son no longer saw, a woman he was about to declare obsolete. Then, it was his turn. Mark walked to the podium, his face alight with a confident, proprietary smile. He took the microphone, and a hush fell over the room. This was it, the moment he had been planning for, the moment of his great, public announcement. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice booming with a false, practiced warmth. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Mark Miller, Eleanor's proud and adoring son." He smiled at me, a brilliant, empty politician's smile. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate my mother's incredible 40-year career. She has given her life to this library, to the world of books and knowledge. And now, it is our turn to give back to her. It is our turn to give back to her. It is our turn to ensure that her next chapter is one of peace, of comfort, and of absolute, worry-free security." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, a master showman setting the stage. "My mother is a strong, independent woman, but she is also 70 years old, and the beautiful home my father built for her has become a burden. A great, lonely house full of stairs and memories, and the constant worry of upkeep. Ning, alias." He looked around the room, his eyes full of a feigned, noble sincerity. "And that is why my wife, Susan, and I have made a decision for her. A decision made out of love, out of a deep and profound concern for her well-being. We have found her a place where she can be safe, where she can be cared for, where she can be surrounded by friends her own age. So, I would like you all to raise a glass with me. A toast to my mother, Eleanor, and to her new home, the beautiful Golden Meadows Nursing Home, where she will be moving next month. Nature one." He raised his glass. The silence in the room was a physical thing. It was a thick, heavy, and deeply uncomfortable silence, punctuated by a few confused, hesitant coughs. My colleagues stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and pity. My friends looked at me with expressions of horrified disbelief. They had all come here to celebrate my freedom, my new life, and they had just witnessed my son, in a public forum, sentence me to a life of managed decline. Mark, in his bubble of arrogant self-regard, did not seem to notice the chilling effect of his words. He was still smiling, his glass held high, waiting for the applause that did not come. He looked at me, a flicker of impatient annoyance in his eyes. He was waiting for me to play my part, to smile my tearful, grateful smile and validate his monstrous unilateral decision. And that was my cue. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. I placed my bouquet of roses carefully on the table, and I walked to the podium. I did not ask for the microphone. I simply took it from his hand. He stared at me, his smile faltering, a look of utter confusion on his face. "Mom, what are you doing?" I turned to the silent, watching crowd. I looked at the faces of my friends, my colleagues, the people who had known and respected me for 40 years, and I began to speak. My voice, after a lifetime of library-induced quiet, was surprisingly strong. It was clear. It was steady. And it was utterly, completely devoid of fear. "Thank you, Mark," I began, my voice ringing out in the silent room. "Thank you for that very illuminating speech, and thank you all for being here tonight. It means the world to me." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. My son is right about one thing. I am beginning a new chapter. And he is right that it involves a change in my living situation and a disposition of my assets. He is, however, slightly mistaken on the details. "Lennon, Azee." A low murmur went through the room. I saw Mark's face begin to pale. Susan, sitting at the head table, had a look of dawning, animalistic panic in her eyes. "It is true," I continued, "that my beautiful home has become a burden. But it is not a burden to me. It has, for the past 3 years, become a burden to my son and his wife, who have been living there, rent-free, after their own financial mismanagement led them to the brink of bankruptcy." "And the murmur in the room grew louder. I saw my son's lawyer, who was sitting at a table near the front, begin to look very, very uncomfortable. "It is also true," I said, my voice as sharp and as clean as a newly cut diamond, "that I will be moving. But I will not be moving to the Golden Meadows Nursing Home, as lovely as I'm sure it is. I will be moving into a beautiful new condominium downtown, a place of my own choosing, a place where I will live my own life, on my own terms." And I then turned to my son. I looked him directly in the eye. I gave him a smile. It was not a mother's smile. It was the smile of a queen who is about to checkmate a foolish, arrogant prince. "And that brings me to you, Mark," I said. I reached into my handbag, and I took out the crisp, legal-sized envelope. "You see, you have been living in my house as a guest who has, I have recently learned, been plotting to dispose of his hostess. And as the owner of that property, I am afraid your tenancy has come to an end. This," I said, holding up the envelope, "is your formal, legal, 30-day eviction notice. I expect you, your wife, and your children to vacate my property by the end of next month." I placed the envelope gently on the podium in front of him. His face was the color of ash. He stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled snake. But I was not finished. "And finally," I said, turning back to the stunned, silent audience, "my son spoke of the disposition of my assets. He is right. That has also been taken care of. As of last week, I have finalized the creation of a new foundation. My entire estate, my home, my savings, my investments, everything has been irrevocably transferred to it. It is called the Eleanor Miller Foundation for the Preservation of Public Libraries. Its mission will be to provide grants and support to underfunded public libraries across the state, to ensure that these sacred spaces of knowledge, of community, of quiet dignity, will be there for generations to come. My son will not be inheriting my house or my money. He will be inheriting what I have always tried to teach him, the knowledge that a legacy is not what you own. It is what you give away." I let the words settle. The silence in the room was no longer just a silence. It was a judgment. I looked at my son, my poor, broken, and utterly defeated son. He was staring at the eviction notice, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. I looked at his wife, Susan. Her face was a mask of pure, ugly, and impotent rage. She had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and utterly publicly humiliated. I turned back to the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice now soft again. "Thank you for celebrating my 40 years of service. It has been the honor of my life. And now, if you'll excuse me, my new life is waiting." And I walked off the stage. I did not look back. I walked through the silent, stunned crowd, my head held high, a 70-year-old librarian who had just reclaimed her own story. The party was over. The war had been won. And the quiet, beautiful, and blessedly independent next chapter of my life was just about to begin. The aftermath of my retirement party was swift and brutal, a controlled demolition of my son's life as he knew it. The eviction notice was legally ironclad. He and Susan had 30 days to vacate my property. The public humiliation at the party was just the beginning. The story of the son who tried to ship his mother off to a nursing home to sell her house, only to be publicly evicted and disinherited, became the stuff of local legend. It was a delicious, cautionary tale, whispered at dinner parties and country club bars, a story of hubris and come-up-pants that the town's gossips feasted on for months. Mark and Susan's attempts to fight back were pathetic and futile. They hired a lawyer, a young, aggressive man who tried to challenge my competency, to paint me as a vindictive, senile old woman who was not of sound mind. But my own lawyer, a man who had known my husband for 30 years and who had seen the cold, clear logic of my planning, was more than his match. We had documentation. We had a psychiatric evaluation I had proactively undergone, which declared me to be of exceptionally sound mind and memory. We had the notarized, ironclad documents of the foundation. They didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Their challenge was dismissed within a week. Their fall from grace was absolute. They had built their lives on the shaky foundation of social status and the appearance of wealth. And with that foundation gone, their entire world collapsed. They were forced to move out of my beautiful, spacious home and into a small, cramped, rented apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place they would have sneered at just a few months earlier. Mark, who had never held a steady job in his life, was forced to look for actual employment. The bank of Mom and Dad was permanently closed, and the real world, the world he had been so carefully shielded from his entire life, was a cold, hard, and unforgiving place. Susan, whose social standing was her entire identity, became a pariah. Her friends, the same women who had admired her sleek modern dining room table, now pretended not to see her at the grocery store. I watched all of this from a distance, from the quiet sanctuary of my new life. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt a profound, aching, and deeply desolate sorrow. I had not set out to destroy my son. I had set out to save myself, but I had learned a hard, bitter lesson. Sometimes, in order to save yourself, you have to be willing to amputate a part of your own heart. The part that still loved the little boy he used to be, the little boy who had held my hand and believed I was magic. That little boy was gone, and the man who had taken his place was a stranger I had been forced to evict from my life. My new life, in contrast, was a quiet, beautiful revelation. My downtown condominium was small, but it was mine. It was filled with light, with my books, with my music, and with the beautiful solid mahogany dining table that I had paid to have moved out of my old basement and into its new place of honor. Every morning, I would sit at that table with my coffee and look out at the city, at the world that was just beginning to open up to me. I began to work with the foundation, the Eleanor Miller Foundation for the Preservation of Public Libraries. It became my new life's work. I was not just a figurehead. I was an active, engaged participant. I read grant proposals from small, struggling libraries across the state. I traveled to visit them, to meet the librarians who were fighting, just as I had, to keep these sacred spaces of knowledge and community alive. I saw the impact of my husband's legacy, and my own, in the faces of the children who had a new after-school reading program, in the eyes of the seniors who had a new large-print book section, in the quiet, grateful smiles of the librarians who could finally afford to fix their leaky roofs. I was no longer just Eleanor Miller, the retired librarian, the grieving widow, the discarded mother. I was a force for good in the world. I was building a new legacy, a legacy that was not made of bricks and mortar, but of stories, of knowledge, of the quiet, revolutionary power of a book in the hands of a child. My relationship with my grandchildren, 10-year-old Emily and 12-year-old Ben, was the most complicated casualty of the war. For the first few months, there was a wall of silence. They were with their parents, caught in the crossfire of their anger and their shame. I sent them letters, cards, small gifts. I did not speak of what had happened. I just told them that I loved them, that I missed them, that I was always their grandmother. The breakthrough came on Christmas Eve. I was sitting alone in my new apartment, watching the snow fall outside my window, feeling a familiar pang of holiday loneliness. And then my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered it, and a small, hesitant voice said, "Grandma!" It was Emily. She was calling me from her friend's phone, a secret, whispered call. "Grandma," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I miss you. We miss you. Mom and Dad. They're so angry all the time now. It's not good here." My heart broke. "Oh, sweetie," I said, my own voice choking. "I miss you too, so much." "Can we see you?" she asked, her voice a small, desperate plea. Just us, without them. And so began our new secret relationship. We would meet on Saturdays at a small park halfway between my new home and theirs. They would take the bus, two brave little soldiers on a secret mission. We would sit on a park bench, and they would tell me about their week, about school, about their friends. And I would listen. I would just listen. I did not try to explain what had happened. I did not try to justify my actions. I just gave them a safe space, a place where they could be children, a place where they could be loved without condition, without agenda. The day my son finally came to see me was a cold, gray afternoon in March, almost a year after the retirement party. He appeared at my door unannounced, a ghost from a life I had almost forgotten. He looked older. The arrogant, confident swagger was gone, replaced by a weary, beaten-down slump in his shoulders. He had lost weight. There were gray streaks in his hair that had not been there a year ago. He did not apologize. He did not ask for forgiveness. He just stood in my doorway and said, "I got a job." "Oh," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "It's not much," he said, looking at the floor. "I'm a project manager for a small construction company. It's a start." "That's wonderful, Mark," I said. And I meant it. He finally looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the little boy he used to be, a flicker of vulnerability, of a genuine, unperformed emotion. "The kids miss you," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "They want to see their grandmother, in her own home." It was not an apology. It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was a white flag, a small, tentative, and deeply significant gesture of surrender. It was an admission that the world he had tried to build, a world without me in it, was a cold, empty, and miserable place. So what is the final lesson from my quiet domestic war? It is that a legacy is not something you inherit. It is something you build. For 40 years, I helped my husband build a legacy of financial security for our son Dent. We thought we were giving him a gift, but we were giving him a poison of entitlement, of expectation, of a profound and crippling disconnect from the real world. We taught him that he was owed a life of comfort, and in doing so, we robbed him of the opportunity to build a life of his own. My true legacy, the one I am building now, is not for him. It is for the children of strangers, for the quiet dreamers in underfunded libraries, for the lonely seniors who find a world of adventure in the pages of a book. And the beautiful, terrible irony is that in giving my inheritance away to strangers, I may have finally given my son the only gift that ever truly mattered. The gift of a life without a safety net. The terrifying, exhilarating, and absolutely necessary gift of having to learn to fly on his own. My relationship with Mark is not what it once was. It is not a relationship of easy, unconditional love. It is a quiet, careful, and deeply complicated thing, a fragile truce between two wounded warriors who are slowly, tentatively, trying to find their way back to a place of peace. He and Susan are still together, bound by the shared trauma of their public humiliation and the grim, day-to-day reality of a life with less. I do not know if they will make it. I do not know if they deserve to. But my relationship with my grandchildren is a different story. It is a garden I am tending with all the love and care in my heart. They come to my apartment every Sunday for dinner. We sit at my beautiful, solid mahogany table, and we talk. We laugh. We argue about books. They are learning that their grandmother is not a burden. She is not an obstacle. She is a person with a life, a purpose, and a story of her own. And in their eyes, I am finally seen. My life is full now, in a way it has never been before. It is not full of the empty, echoing rooms of a house that was no longer my home. It is full of the quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying hum of purpose. It is full of the rustle of turning pages, the grateful smiles of strangers, and the quiet, steady love of two children who are learning to see me for who I truly am. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It has been a story of great loss, but also of a surprising and deeply liberating victory. Your support has been a constant source of strength. If my story has moved you or given you the courage to reclaim your own, a like or a subscription to Excellent Grandma would be a profound honor. Remember that you are the architect of your own life. Do not let anyone, not even the people you love the most, declare your home to be a burden or your life to be obsolete. You are the keeper of your own story. You are the master of your own house. And your legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what you build every single day. Be well and be strong. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Eleanor.